Today's video is powered by hot dogs. Skibbity-bop, howdy folks. You know, it's kind of ironic that I am parodying ReviewTechUSA here when I actually have some very serious criticism to level against this guy's newly commercialized channel. If Rich wants to make money off of YouTube, doing things like what he's doing with Nintendo's financial results is not the way to do it. More on that later. So the reason for this parody is Rich over at ReviewTechUSA posted two very conflicting videos about Nintendo within 24 hours of each other. Oh, Nintendo's going to post a second straight annual loss. Oh, look, Nintendo turned a profit. What am I supposed to do with that? Well, what I did was I completely bypassed his channel and I went and looked at other news sites to see what the heck happened with Nintendo. So here's the fundamental problem here with Rich and his channel. If he wants to be taken seriously in terms of news commentary by people other than fanboys of whoever he's plugging at the time or saying nice things about, he needs to avoid situations where I'd feel like, where myself or anybody looking at his videos feels like they can't trust his channel and thus bypasses it entirely so he doesn't get views or anything like that in order to get the story on things. I mean, this kind of result from this kind of situation isn't going to be good for him if he wants to make money off of his YouTube channel and not have a day job. But that's a totally different discussion. I really want to talk more about Nintendo than ReviewTechUSA here, as well as clear up the confusion with where this stuff is coming from. Because when I went and looked on Google News at various news sources and stuff like that, I actually found out that the news media is just as conflicted over Nintendo's results as Rich was on his channel. And I think a lot of that comes from a fundamental lack of understanding about how businesses work here and some basic accounting terms and things like that. So, straight from the horse's mouth, I eventually wound up just getting the consolidated summary of the financial numbers for their latest fiscal year over at Nintendo, and I'm looking at the numbers, and this is where the confusion comes from. The net income for Nintendo was a positive 7 billion yen. This is what people are saying all these great things about Nintendo for, and that, oh, look, they turned a profit. Yay, cool, awesome. The problem is their operating income remains in the red at negative 36.4 billion, so an operating income loss, which is more of a long-term indicator of the fact that Nintendo as a company is in trouble, still in trouble, despite the profit. Now, there are a lot of news stories about Nintendo right now that are still saying bad things about the company, that Nintendo's not out of the woods, and I tend to agree with them because Nintendo has been a maverick in the gaming industry for the past 20 years, but this gravy train has to stop somewhere. And I think Nintendo really needs to understand that they can't just keep doing their own thing and expecting people to play along with it, aka they need to think outside the Mario box in order to get back into the ring in terms of gaming in general and things like that are going on, because I personally think they just got lucky with the Wii. Their success, and they've already forecasted this, they're not expecting the Wii U sales-wise within X amount of time to be as successful as the Wii for various reasons. And I think that the Wii U is actually going to not do as well as the Wii for various reasons as well, which I'll get into a little later on. But that's where the confusion comes from. Let's take a look at some of the notes here underneath the numbers here. Main reason for operating loss. Though selling, general, and administrative expenses decreased compared to the previous fiscal year, they exceeded gross profit, which led to an operating loss situation for 2 consecutive fiscal terms. So that's when you say, oh, second. Now the projected loss, that was because of a Bloomberg report before the numbers came out. And of course they missed on that, but they were sort of right on the operating loss, because the operating loss is why anybody who's skeptical of Nintendo is still skeptical of Nintendo. Here's another article I'm looking at from ZDNet about how they missed their profit forecast, but they still made money, but that operating loss is still the giant gorilla in the room that's and stuff like that, not to be confused with Donkey Kong, of course. But I'm not surprised that Nintendo's results are a mixed bag at best here, because Nintendo has been needing a big slice of humble pie for the longest time. The last time I think Nintendo really did well for itself was the 16-bit era, the Super Nintendo. ever since then, they might as it pretty much looks like they're just trying to dream up and think up new ways to gimp themselves in the gaming world. I mean, first you had the Nintendo 64. Okay, so Super Nintendo does quite well, finally dominates over the Sega Genesis with the Play It Loud era and the blast processing and stuff like that. So during the Play It Loud era, they finally put the Genesis in its place, even though censorship in games like Mortal Kombat was still driving people to the Sega Genesis, even if the experience on the Genesis, as far as the presentation was concerned, would be not as good as on the Super Nintendo. But Super Nintendo, I think, was the last really competitive, competent console that Nintendo made. Beginning with the Nintendo 64, they've just been messing up one release after another after another. And I'm not saying that Nintendo needs to have the best hardware in order to do well. All of their consoles have had at least one technologically superior competitor that they've done better than. So, or at least so that they've competed with, if not done better than. The Super Nintendo and the Nintendo and the NES both have had those kinds of competitors. The NES had the Sega Master System, which they did better than SMS because of a bunch of reasons, most of them business related, like dealing with retailers and stuff, saying, hey, we're not going to let you sell Nintendo stuff if you sell other stuff and things like that. And then you had the Super Nintendo, which saw the Neo Geo and some of the early CD consoles during its lifespan, and in some cases did better than both of them in terms of popularity and becoming well-known and things along those lines. So Nintendo doesn't need, per se, to have the best hardware in order to do well, but what they've been doing lately is really pushing the limits of this idea. Pretty much ever since the CD deal with Sony fell through in the 16-bit days, Nintendo has been making questionable hardware decisions with each successive home console. The Nintendo 64, of course, was laughed at and jeered at for using cartridges right as the Sony PlayStation started showing that CD consoles could actually be successful despite their load times and things like that. It's true, CDs were a giant question mark at the time the Nintendo 64 was in development, but the fact that ultimately the N64 wound up having cartridges and stuff like that really caused problems, of course. We know that Square left with Final Fantasy, and a lot of previous third-party developers that would develop for Nintendo consoles kind of backed off and things along those lines. And overall, ultimately, the PlayStation wound up embarrassing the Nintendo 64 in terms of being with the times. Now, you'd think that Nintendo would have learned their lesson from being embarrassed by a Sony console with superior storage media, especially as, at the end of the Nintendo 64's life cycle, the PlayStation 2 came out and started capitalizing on DVD-related media, or DVD-type stuff. And so the GameCube comes out, and Nintendo finally gets the whole disc thing, and they put a disc as their storage media on a console. But what do? They use a proprietary format that's not the same size as a DVD and can't hold as much data as a DVD. So they get embarrassed by the PS2, and they get embarrassed by a Sony console yet again. Then the Wii comes out, and PlayStation 3 has Blu-ray disc, which then goes on to win the format war versus HD DVD, leaving Nintendo and Microsoft at a disadvantage storage media-wise with multi-plat games and things like that, being stuck with only DVD-related stuff, but yet again, a proprietary DVD-style format. Now it looks like finally Nintendo seems to have figured out the whole storage media thing with the proprietary 25-gig Blu-ray-esque format for its Wii U optical disc, but it's kind of like a Blu-ray disc in terms of size. But they seem to have finally gotten the storage media thing figured out after 2 decades, but with the Wii U storage. But now the problem is core hardware. Beginning with the Wii, they deliberately made and released a console that was notably behind the others in terms of its power and speed, didn't even do HD. Precisely at the time when HD TVs were starting to take over what kind of screen people had in their living rooms. Do these people stay up at night trying to find new ways to shoot their consoles in the foot? I mean, seriously. Then you had the GameCube with its redesign that removed the component video out and just stuck with composite and S-video right around the same time, of course, that HD TVs first started becoming viable. I mean, seriously. So, the Wii, of course. It's ironic that a Wii is now the best thing to play GameCube games on because it'll support proper widescreen and progressive scan. So that's one reason to keep one's Wii around after getting a Wii U, to upscale all those Wii games to high-def resolutions, which is really the only real reason I can think of to even bother with a Wii U in the first place. I can't for the life of me think of a good reason besides that to buy a Wii U. None. None whatsoever. And it's annoying that I spend a couple $100 on a Wii back in the day, and now the only reason I can think of to do it again for the Wii U is so that the Wii games that I haven't gotten around to playing will actually be sent over an HDMI connection instead of that old analog component thing with the artifacts on the screen and crap like that. And yeah, I wonder why sales of the Wii U have been soft so far. Gee, I wonder. Oh yeah, by the way, while we're on the topic of questionable Nintendo hardware decisions, 3DS and 3DS XL with only one analog stick. What year does Nintendo think it is? I mean, seriously, even the PS Vita can do it right with two. Yeah, when does this crap end? And that ultimately is going to be a problem here, because if Nintendo thinks that the Wii U is just going to be Wii HD and it's going to do as well, they've got another thing coming, that's for sure. See, the Wii was a well-needed response to problems in the gaming industry that were going on right around the time that the Wii came out. For example, there was kind of a disenfranchisement of casual gamers going on. So how has the Wii done well in terms of its success and its surprise success in the last generation? Well, first by being casual friendly with the motion controls and stuff like that and these other games, and also being relatively more affordable, which both addressed two market frustrations with the console gaming industry around the time that the Wii launched. The PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360 were really nice pieces of hardware. They were really, really nice pieces of hardware, but they had high price tags. And before all the price cuts, the people really were kind of, especially as the economy tanked, people were just cringing at buying consoles, because the idea of buying consoles, because of the high price tag and the relatively closed gamer culture. And what Nintendo ultimately wound up doing was responding to two market problems with the Wii and getting everybody's attention. So now we've got, say, people who, and of course you have the whole thing with input as well. Gabe Newell at DICE this year, which there is his keynote speech is on YouTube. I'm going to do some more with this speech later on, either through radio style or a podcast, but he brought up a pretty good point, which kind of serves as a nice counterbalance to any discussions people might have about post-PC or is the PC dying or something. But the idea basically is that PCs are suffering largely from input problems right now because other devices are, besides having new OSs and stuff like that and being mobile, they also have more intuitive inputs, because touch controls can be a lot more intuitive than keyboards and mice. We'll talk about that at some other point, but really the PC just needs to find a good way to implement touch functionality, and they're back in the game as far as Gabe Newell and myself are concerned, because I agree with the guy, but that's another discussion for another day. But input has been an issue with computery devices like computers and consoles, and now here comes the Wii with the motion controls and Wii Sports, bringing back the simplistic fun that video games used to be all about back during the Atari days, when you didn't have to have this big movie-like production that where sometimes the game almost didn't have any gameplay because of all the cutscenes and interactive movies and things along those lines and that kind of stuff. No, the Wii Sports and what made the Wii a surprise success brought back stuff that hasn't been seen since the Atari days, when you could just fire up a video game and play and then shut it off, and after like 20 minutes or so, and not feel like you missed anything. And so this whole focus on casual gamers and getting them to play a console instead of something like Yahoo Chess or Windows Solitaire or something like that, this really kind of met a market need and got everybody else noticing, hey, we can't write these people off. They actually will buy stuff. This fundamentally is the reason why I think that the Wii's surprise success is going to be a one-shot deal, and it's not going to repeat with the Wii U, because the success has already been had, so to speak, and the industry has responded and corrected a lot of this. There's a lot more casual-friendly stuff on the other types of consoles as well. You have Xbox and Xbox 360 and PS3. You've got Kinect, PlayStation Move. You've got downloadable game stores now that are bigger than ever before. before. Then you had Steam on the PC side do some of this for PC gaming as well. So everybody knows now that you can't count out casual gamers anymore. And some people would even argue that gaming is becoming too casualized, which is a far cry from the rather closed gaming culture that was developing in the early 2000s. So now that this door has been blown wide open and this has been dealt with, there's basically there's no room left for a little console that could, like the Wii, to do what the Wii did again. Plus, when you're talking casual gamers or maybe like nursing homes that have Wii Sports or something like that for their residents to play or something along those lines, they went to all the trouble to get a Wii and the game still works fine. They're probably just going to keep using the Wii, so they're not going to be in a big rush to spend all that money again to upgrade to newer consoles and stuff like that if the Wii still works just fine. So it's something really to consider here. Secondly, Nintendo can't play the little console that could card again with the Wii U because there's another console that outwees the Wii U called the Ouya. It's going to be, $100, and it's going to be open source, and it's going to run off of a variant of Android and run games and stuff like that. Free-to-play games, other games like that, have its own little store and stuff. I might actually check the Ouya out despite my lousy financial situation if I really want to. But here's the thing. Small, affordable, casual-friendly console, that little console that could. This time around, that's going to be the Ouya. The Wii U, price-wise, isn't even close to what the Ouya is going to be at. So I expect the Ouya to be this generation's Wii here. So where does that leave Nintendo? Their console is pretty much about a generation behind in terms of hardware compared to what Sony and Microsoft are about to release. But there's another console for your little cheap console with the little console that could, where the Wii was last go around. So where does that leave Nintendo? Answer: not in a very good position. There is one thing that I like about the Nintendo Wii U, though, and that is the form factor, because I was mentioning earlier about Gabe Newell in that speech about input and the problems on PCs and stuff. The big screen, small screen thing that the Wii U lets you do is something I can easily imagine becoming the next big PC form factor and fixing all these input problems. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Steam's expansion into hardware involves making a device that functions similar to a Wii U with big screen, small screen, except using a PC environment to play PC games on. Because if you ever, I don't know how many of you folks are Larry the Cable Guy fans out there, but if you ever see his DVD, Get Her Done, he's got this joke where he's making fun of like young gamers and stuff like that. He's like, I was with this guy, we're playing some video game football, and I was like, how do you pass the ball? And he says, well, you hit this button, you hit the trigger, you spin the hat, you hit the trigger, you move the thumbstick, you hit the trigger, and you hit the trigger. He said, well, I don't make a button that says friggin' pass. Of course, he didn't use that F word, I don't think, but he's right, though. But he's right. And the whole thing with touch inputs and stuff like that is that if you have something like a Nintendo DS touchscreen or the Wii U gamepad touchscreen, you can make a button that says pass in a football game or something like that. But yeah, I mean, touch controls have a lot of potential, even compared to motion controls. So I would not be surprised if we eventually see computers mimicking the Wii U's format and the Wii U becoming like, even if the Wii U doesn't do well overall as a console, I wouldn't be surprised if people remember the Wii U for establishing a new form factor for PCs that someone else does to bring PCs back in terms of input, because I can totally imagine having a dual purpose screen like that, because things like keyboards and mice, I mean, if you learn how to use a mouse, you can be good with a mouse, and if you learn how to touch type, you can be good with a keyboard. But that's the thing, there's a learning curve with those versus just touch the screen. I mean, that's one reason why all these touch devices are doing so well among casual computing users, and why people are thinking that smartphones and tablets are going to replace PCs in a lot of areas, is because touch is just way more intuitive for the mainstream audience. You can still learn how to use a mouse, and the mouse was great when it came out back in the 80s. But there's still a learning curve associated with becoming good at using a mouse. And there's a learning curve associated with physical keyboards too, aka learning how to touch type. So I would not be surprised if eventually we see computers of all shapes and sizes with touch input of some sort. But of course, you don't want to get your fingerprints all over a nice big screen, so mirror it on a small screen and have output to 2 screens at once. So you can have your big screen stuff with a nice screen that doesn't get fingerprints all over it, and you can just have the little screen in your hand looking at it when you're doing the typing on the virtual keyboard, or clicking or tapping things on your desktop and stuff, which by the way solves the living room problem for PCs. You have a little touch panel that you can use to operate stuff on the big screen or use as your screen, period. And you just sit in the living room, sit back on your couch, and you just use that thing. So I think the Wii U, in a way, is ahead of its time. But as a gaming device, I just don't see it mimicking the success of the Wii, because what made the Wii succeed has come and gone. The industry has responded, and the industry has corrected some of these problems that the Wii took care of and succeeded with during its heyday, before the sales started dropping off all over the place. As far as Nintendo as a company is concerned, I think that they need to take a look at what's going on and respond accordingly, instead of just thinking that Mario is going to constantly bail them out. Because if the company's worth more doing software than hardware, we could see things like, them pulling a Sega, or maybe even a hostile takeover if somebody finds a way to buy out Nintendo. If things get bad enough for them, someone runs in, rescues them, and then shuts down the hardware division, and now we start seeing Mario games all over the place on all kinds of platforms and things like that. Because in a time when nobody has any money, and the question of gaming is now turning to software rather than hardware, because there's all these other devices out there that are more than competent at running games, like mobile devices, tablets, PCs, etc. PC gaming's come roaring back. The whole thing with consoles desperately trying to have reasons to buy the hardware is really going to get harder and harder for these companies. And eventually we're going to get to the point, I think, where the market can't support 3 players. So a Nintendo or something like that. And that's really the kind of future that Nintendo needs to plan for, and not just have, we're going to keep getting people to buy our stuff because Mario's on it. But if they want to keep getting made fun of and called the has-been in the gaming industry because of their former dominance of the gaming world and now their utter silliness with all these stupid little hardware messes they keep making for themselves, then by all means, and we'll just see how the numbers pan out. I mean, they're a mixed bag now, with the net income that's a profit and the operating income that's a loss. And people are taking that in whatever direction they wish to. But in order for the results to be more positive, really, Nintendo needs to get off of its pedestal and its high horse and take a look at how things work nowadays, instead of being out there in La La Land pretending it's still the 80s or the 90s and stuff like that. Because, well, they'll just get left behind if they don't, as far as I'm concerned, because the industry is changing. I mean, even Sony, after a little bit of humble pie it was dealt with the PS3, wants to change things up royally for the PS4, maybe even fundamentally change how people view gaming in the first place. And then you got Steam to contend with, and the resurgence of PC gaming, and now mobile gaming as well, which is where, again, you have games that can be played across multiple devices and stuff like that. That'll be a force to be reckoned with. Hardware, I don't know at this point. I've wondered if consoles have a future, and dedicated generic gaming hardware, who knows? Who knows if that'll stick around. So Nintendo needs to get with it. I mean, the results that they had, we can latch onto, look, a net income of positive 7 billion yen, and we can go to town with it. But the fact remains, Nintendo's current situation is a mixed bag, and there are more long-term threats to Nintendo with this crap they keep doing with hardware than anything we can say anything good about right now. Like the 3DS and the XL, one thumbstick. Are you kidding me? And of course, if the Wii U turns out to be mishandled, so to speak, I'd really hate, if the Wii U doesn't do well, I'd really hate if the form factor that the Wii U brings to the table gets dismissed because the console doesn't do well. That's another issue for Nintendo to deal with as well, because I can totally imagine computers running similar to a Wii U very, very easily and resurging in popularity as more powerful devices that you run at home. But that's another discussion for another day. And as far as ReviewTechUSA is concerned, look at what happened here. He posted conflicting videos, and I had to bypass his channel to get the real story on things. Now, do this enough times, and I can easily imagine subscribers being like, you know, this guy just says whatever people send him. I'm going to do my own homework, and then they stop watching his videos. So that's definitely something that Rich should hawkeye for, and not necessarily run his channel entirely off of user-submitted articles to basically, because, I mean, if he gets the reputation for not doing his homework, then he can just forget about having a big subscriber base for any respectable length of time. But yeah, that's the thing. Sometimes whenever you're dealing with other people with something like a YouTube channel, people can be very, very fickle, especially with how YouTube is these days. And it'd be sad if, you know, this guy has made enough progress where he can quit his day job because of YouTube. It'd be really sad for him to have done all this only to have some stupid mistakes like getting people to think, oh, this guy doesn't do his homework, to ruin everything after all the progress he's made. So best of luck to the guy. But, well, this has been one heck of a parody, hasn't it? Almost as long as a radio style. Okie dokie, that's enough gaming footage with chit-chat over the top for now. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay signing off. Thanks for stopping by.